Hi there everyone. Welcome to this week's focus on the city and the bush. Now, I'd like to start off with this picture that you see here, because this picture reminds me of what the key issues are as I come to understand them. Here you have a CSIRO van in the Western Desert, about 300 k's out from the WA coast, up New Karratha way. And this is modern science driving over land, bringing science to that land. The question is, what knowledge was in that land to begin with, and how have we engaged with it, or have we just driven over it? So this is sort of a bit of a metaphor for how we think about rural places and rural knowledges and rural lands in my perspective on this. Now, the chapter in the Connell book by Anthony Welsh, The City and the Bush, is basically probably one of my least favourite chapters in any textbook. I really, really do not like this chapter. To me, the chapter epitomises what is wrong with the attitude that we have in a lot of modern education to rural areas. It is basically a deficit discourse, or an argument about what's wrong with rural areas for the entire chapter. Not only that, it's out of date, it doesn't have a positive frame about rurality at all, but the most crucial thing, and this is what I see impacting on education generally in Australia and a lot of the developed nations, as we might call them, is this implicit metropolitan norm. All the deficits that Anthony Welsh writes about in that chapter have an implicit norm or positive to them. He actually doesn't even address what is good and normal and right and why that is the case and how it's come to be the case in his chapter. He just talks about all these deficit problems in the rural. Now, compared on some statistical levels, yes, the rural does have poorer educational achievement and other issues of social dislocation. It also has some absolutely awesome areas of awesome achievement and great social harmony. Why on earth are people leaving the cities for the life in the country if it's so bad? Okay, the migration from cities is huge. We know this. Okay, people talk about the lifestyle, the connection to community, all these positive frames of reference that come into discussion when we talk about the country. None of that comes through in this sort of stuff or this discourse. Now, there's some extra readings in this week's readings and other areas that talk about some of the positives in the rural. Basically, I can tell you some things like when we look at NAPLAN data, that the country schools, especially when we get beyond the city fringe, are actually doing a hell of a lot more with kids than city schools. The relationship between social background and achievement is less than it is in the city. So they're working on it as a great equaliser. Now, I want to move away from Anthony's chapter. Okay, he's talked about the negatives, but yeah, there's heaps of positives. The Triple R Tech site about promoting rural schooling, rural teaching, a whole range of things like this are quite useful resources. But I want to use it as a metaphor. What's missing in this city in the bush, and why I've combined the two in this topic for our little unit, is it's about place. Okay? It's about recognising place and working with place. And this builds on the virtual school bag and the funds of knowledge notion that we've used in the previous weeks. Place is where education happens. Place is where people live. Now, Pat Thompson, who we introduced with the virtual school bag, came up with this notion or this word called thisness. Okay, let me just correct that slide. Okay, now thisness is a nothing word, but it's one of those beautiful simplicities where she's coined this phrase back in 2000. In her work, when she was going around schools in the outer rim of Adelaide and talking to teachers and principals about what was happening in that school and why it was working here and wasn't working in the school down the road, that she heard the teachers, and you hear it today in our schools, saying, well, in this school this happens, in this school this is the reason. So it was all about thisness. And the issues that she came up with are the ones that you see in front of us. Each school has a distinctive blend of people, happenings, resources, issues, narratives, theologies, knowledges, etc. Okay, So basically, these things all come together. There's a saturated geography of history and power and happening and people, hopes, dreams, aspirations, past events that come together uniquely in each school depending on who makes up that school community at any particular point in time. And those things change over time as well. Basically, the notion then is, if every school is different, or a different coming together of all these elements, then what we should be doing in schools is also different, because they are the result of different comings together. Now, I position this in this unit because in the city, there are different world environments that students live in, different understandings, different ways of being in the world, to country kids. So I can say to you things like country kids, theoretically at least, have more of a connection to land and environment. They're more likely to be able to connect environment, the outdoors, to their knowledge and thinking, than say city kids have grown up in suburbia, in large cities, and haven't experienced the outdoors. So we can draw on different knowledges, different funds of knowledge there. Okay, the issue gets broader and stronger. Things like you might have heard me mention when NAPLAN asks about writing about day at the beach. Okay, country kids obviously haven't been to a beach, so the medium or testing their literacy is affected by that question. Or when a maths question is about a train timetable or using a city block. Okay, the country kids haven't been on a train. City block is not how they think. Country kids think about landmarks when they navigate. We know these things. So these sort of mediums become problematic in terms of this stuff. In terms of breaking down Pat's notion of thisness, she basically says, look, there's these three elements: the neighbourhood context, the institutional context, and the system. Basically, school mix, the resources in the school, and the neighbourhood issues. Right? Who are the kids? What are the makeup of them? What's their socioeconomic background, ethnic background, language background? What resources are there? So some schools, because they happen to be in wealthy suburbs, get heaps of parent donations. Others get none. Okay, and other issues. In Pat's work, the factory closed down the road and there's no jobs in the community as a result, and that's being with people that work for 3 generations. That's a bit of a problem. Or in some other areas, there's community conflicts, rival families or groups that are fighting. That comes into the school, causes issues. Institutional contexts are things like, is it a kindergarten, is it K to 12, K to 10, is it a primary or a high school, private, non-government, whatever the case is, those institutional contexts come in, and system supports, in that larger state systems have that pool of knowledge in head office and expertise. More independent schools don't have a system to draw upon. So these sort of things all come into it. In terms of our thinking here, there's 2 things, okay? It's, when we talk about the city and the bush, let's just think about what are we seeing as the implicit norm of schooling when we talk about the city and the bush. The implicit norm tends to be the worldview of the city. But it was not always that case, and doesn't have to always be that case. Often that worldview becomes the cause of the problem. A lot of country kids aren't disadvantaged, okay? Knowing about our environment and our world is not a bad thing. But even statistically, they really get some awesome results. It's just that it's complex, and on average they get worse results. So we can't say averages speak for everyone in that respect, because the numbers are a bit all over the place. But let's use it as a metaphor. Let's think about the schools in which we work. What do we take for granted, and what is the makeup of that school? How is a city school, its makeup, different to a country school? And how can we use both of those positively? Okay, there are ample studies of country schools that are awesome stuff when we work with the community. Okay, same with city schools. So who is it that we've got in the school? How does it all come together? So that's the focus. I don't want us to be reinforcing deficit stereotypes of country schools as being the most terrible places. Yes, they can be difficult to staff. Some of them are awesome. Some of them might have some social challenges that are challenging for some teachers. Some teachers might thrive in those environments. But everything's different. We have to consider what makes things different as a way of engaging with it, rather than saying, we don't like that, I'm not going to do it. So we've got to look at our frames of reference when we do this. Now, there's some other issues that I can go on with, and you'll see in the slides, there's some more slides around place and space and rurality. I'm going to do an addendum talk to my 10-minute one and put up, but for now, this is the 10-minute key points that I wanted to address.